The wheel of time is a spinning wheel. The threads it spins are the lives of all of the characters in the series. It weaves these threads into what is called the pattern. The pattern, made up of all of these threads, is the literal fabric of reality. This pattern is the same for every rotation of the wheel, a cycle. It has the ultimate goal to guide the world toward the end of a cycle, the last battle. This battle involves the Chosen One, called the Dragon Reborn, facing the Dark One, or the Shadow, the equivalent of Sauron. If you didn't know, this series is heavily inspired by Lord of the Rings. The consequences of losing this last battle is a breaking. The magic is corrupted and evil wins, for that cycle at least. Winning means everything is fine and a new cycle comes about without incident. To accomplish its goal of reaching the last battle, the wheel shamelessly controls these characters. They are all well aware of its control and accept it as a natural, if sometimes inconvenient, part of their lives. After all, its interference is what can save them when the last battle does come. The wheel's control varies between characters. For example, they may want to leave a location, only to have a sudden and unexplainable urge to stay instead. Like Matt, he simply wanted to leave the rebel camp of the Dragon Reborn. He makes it some distance away before discovering that the camp is about to be attacked. He turns around, planning to warn the others, and then leave without further incident. Instead, he is strongly urged back by the wheel itself, and ends up commanding the counterattack. He even thinks to himself as all of this is happening, how had he gotten into this? It had all started so simply, just give a warning and go. Each step after had seemed so small, so necessary, and now he had waded waist deep into the mud, and no choice but to keep on. Matt started out with the intent to just warn the others and leave. Then he kept following through with each step or small urges from the wheel. Urges that he could have ignored, but he didn't. And then he actively continued to follow through with these urges because he felt he was obligated to help since he had already made it that far. Might as well keep going, right? This is the most obvious example of the wheel directly interfering in someone's life. There are others that are less obvious, including a slew of spontaneous weddings, a loose roof tile that flies through the air and kills an unsuspecting woman, and a crop failure that is immediately followed by the discovery of a fortune in gold. The control the wheel does have over these characters is certainly strong. But even with its control, it still doesn't control them like mindless robots from point A to B. If it did, they wouldn't have any other option but to do what the wheel dictated for them. Luckily,
that's not how
the wheel
works.
If the wheel did control these characters this way, their lack of freedom would fall under hard determinism. Hard determinism is an ethical theory built on the idea that the past and natural consequences, or laws of nature, are what dictate the future.
I am inevitable.
Only one choice exists for anybody and everybody. A choice that, once it is made, no one has any control over or can change. For example, say you're walking down the street minding your own business. Then, suddenly, out of complete nowhere, a random stranger pushes you into an uncovered manhole in your path. You're not seriously hurt, just bruised up a bit. In this scenario, you had no choice if you were going to fall into that manhole or not. A stranger, an outside force, made that decision for you. You were already walking down the street with no knowledge of what was about to happen, and that manhole already existed, leaving you to be subject to forces outside of your control. The manhole existing and that stranger pushing you. This lack of choice is what hard determinism focuses on, by saying there was no other choice. Everything that happened, like you falling, was already going to happen anyway. And since the past cannot be changed, there is no other option but to experience that result. This is a very grim view of the world. because then there's the question of how much choice we do or don't have. If we don't have any choice, no matter what, then we can't be responsible for our own decisions because what happens to us is outside of our control or ability to change even in the moment. And like I said, the Wheel of Time does take control away from these characters, but not completely. It still leaves them with some ability to choose if they'll follow through with its urges or not. Matt could have chosen to ignore the wheel, or the treasure discovered after that crop failure could have been left undiscovered. Mostly, in general, these characters can pretty much do whatever they want. Loial, an Ogier, a troll-like creature in the series that's hundreds of years old and very wise, explains, if a man tries to change the direction of his life, and the pattern has room for it, the wheel just weaves on and takes it in. There is always room for small changes, but sometimes the pattern simply won't accept a big change, no matter how hard you try. So, as long as their decisions won't prevent the events that are absolutely essential for the last battle, these people can do pretty much whatever they want and they're free to choose. There is a way, however, that choice can be completely taken away. Balefire. Balefire is a ridiculously powerful stream of magic fire. It works by burning away part of a thread, or threads, that have already been woven into the pattern. Depending on how powerful the person using the balefire is and for how long it is used, it can affect anywhere from seconds to minutes of a person's life, or multiple people. Anyone hit by it is erased from the pattern for the duration of time the balefire burned their threads. So for those seconds or minutes in the past, any actions they took are erased from when it affected them and from then on. Like when Matt was attacked by a dark hound, a nasty mutant dog demon thing that can kill anyone even with its mere saliva. Matt is injured by one and almost dies. His life is saved by his friend, Rand, who uses balefire on the creature. The balefire removes the dark hound from the pattern, meaning it no longer existed in the short time leading up to it attacking Matt. The dark hound was essentially removed from existence from the time just before Matt was attacked, and from then on. Balefire's ability to remove someone's choice is different from hard determinism's belief that the past and natural consequences dictate the present and future, because there is nothing to do that, since the past no longer exists to affect the present and the future. Time in the Wheel of Time is as straightforward as it gets, past, present, future. This is why balefire is so destructive. It removes the past and leaves the characters with no choice but to move forward with a changed present reality. A reality that isn't an alternate reality. Matt wasn't saved because a reality where he wasn't attacked replaced the one where he was. Instead, the cause of the attack itself, the Dark Hound, was removed from reality by balefire, and so the effect of the loss of the Dark Hound was Matt not being attacked, since the Dark Hound no longer exists and was therefore unable to attack in the first place as a result of its removal by the balefire. I should mention that alternate realities do exist in this universe. Kind of. They're called mirrors of the wheel. These mirrors are potential futures that could have formed the reality that is the pattern, had the choices and events that they're made up of come to be. But they are not part of the pattern because they are too unlikely and too incompatible with the reality the wheel is spinning the threads of the pattern into. They are described as those worlds truly are mirrors in a way. Some of them reflect only great events in the true world, but some have a shadow of that reflection even before that event occurs. Reflections of what will be are fainter than reflections of what is or what was. These mirrors exist as an interesting alternative to the direction that the story ultimately goes. They also show that other choices do exist for these characters, even if those choices are very unlikely. I know I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but choice is important, because if these mirrors did not exist, or some other way for characters to choose something different did not exist, what other options would these characters have but to follow the wheel and the pattern? If there was no choice, how could a person be moral? The principle of alternate possibilities states that a person is morally responsible for what he has done only if he could have done otherwise. In more simple terms, if a person is forced to be moral or not, we typically don't hold them responsible for their actions, since they were literally not able to make any other choice. So let's say characters like Rand were unable to make any other choice than to act on the events that would lead to the last battle, then he would not be responsible for the actions that led to that battle because he could not do anything else. This would take away his influence on the pattern, and to make his own acceptance of being the dragon reborn pointless to the whole story. He would, in this case, be an example of the end goal of hard determinism, that there is no other choice but the one that outside forces have for you. The mirrors themselves don't have any real significant effect on the plot. They do prove that alternate choices exist and that the future isn't set in stone. They don't affect the pattern once the threads are woven. They just exist as proving there was other options. Once a choice is made and acted on, determinism doesn't care about other possibilities. Its only focus is on the decision that was ultimately made, what past events led up to that decision, and how that decision will shape the future. As William James explains in The Dilemma of Determinism, possibilities that fail to get realized are, for determinism, pure illusions. They never were possibilities at all. What's done is done. Other outcomes and what-ifs only mattered as proof that other options existed before a final choice was made. The wheel also doesn't care about alternate possibilities. Once the threads are woven into the pattern, they are set in stone unless they are destroyed by balefire. The wheel takes in events from the past, including past cycles, to determine the future as dictated by the pattern. I know I've really hammered on the control the wheel does have on these characters in service of the plot. I mean, the pattern, so far. But its control isn't one way. Under what could be considered normal circumstances in this universe, an average character's life decisions do impact the life threads of themselves and those closest to them. In other words, a person's actions aren't isolated and do change the pattern, even if ever so slightly. ta'veren do this as well, at a much greater scale. A ta'veren is an individual who's chosen by the wheel. Their influence only lasts a few years leading up to the last battle, but it is strong enough that they are able to more drastically change the pattern to their will than the average character. Exactly how they do this is unique to each individual, though they all can attract other people to them and their cause, and their will. Matt is a ta'veren who hears dice rattle around in his head, seemingly at random. The fact that he experiences the influence of the wheel as dice shows his propensity for gambling and somewhat carefree nature. He has no control over the dice themselves, but he can choose if he'll act when they do start in his head. At one point, Matt even thinks to himself, just because the flaming dice started or stopped did not mean he had to do anything. Usually when they stopped spinning, it was too late to not do something. The problem was, he wanted to know why. This proves that when he feels the dice, Matt could decide if he acts or not. He has the option to do nothing and ignore them. Although that would admittedly be annoying, to hear dice in your head with no idea why. When Matt does choose to figure out what's going on with the dice, he does so because he's curious, which means his actions, even though they are prompted by the dice, are self-motivated. This is important because it means the wheel doesn't take control away from him. He can still choose to act for himself and let his curiosity get the best of him. All the wheel does is strongly urge him to act in a way that it wants or needs. Another ta'veren, Perrin, experiences strong urges to help wherever he can. He is a loyal and strong-willed person, so this really does make sense. In one case, in Perrin's home village, the Two Rivers, is about to be attacked. He wants to save the people he grew up with and cares a lot about. They refuse to leave, wanting to take their stand and fight against the forces of the Dark One. Perrin knows that this is not going to end well and manages to convince them that they do in fact need to leave their homes immediately. After he is successful in doing so, one character points out that he was able to convince them because he is a ta'veren. Of any of us, you should know how stubborn Two Rivers people can be. You have altered the course events would have followed in the Two Rivers without you. With a few words spoken in irritation, Perrin himself in doing this didn't specifically concentrate on him being a ta'veren and somehow force that to his advantage. He only cared about his friends and family and wanted to save them. It just so happened that him being a ta'veren helped him accomplish his goal more successfully than if he wasn't.
Coincidence? I think not!
His will to save others pulled on the pattern, and it accommodated his decision to help. Both Mat and Perrin were subject to a destiny outside of their control. They were ta'veren and destined to act in a way that would help their world reach the last battle. But they could still choose if they would act and how if they did. Rand, however, doesn't have this luxury. He is also a ta'veren. He shares similar abilities as his friends, only he's much stronger. He is able to bring his friends to him when he needs help, as well as convince entire nations like the Aelial and the Windfinders to his cause. Egwene acknowledges this when Rand proposes part of his plan for the last battle to her. Those near him would begin to see things his way, would work unconsciously to see his will done. He can do these things because, on top of being ta'veren, he is also the Dragon Reborn.
Your life isn't going to be what you thought.
The Dragon Reborn has less choice than any other character. Since he is the Chosen One, his life is the most controlled by the wheel because he has to reach the last battle and fight the Dark One. It also doesn't help that part of his life is determined by past cycles. So the past literally dictates his life, which lines up with predestination. Now, usually predestination is reserved for the belief that God has pre-planned our lives and salvation. The wheel was technically made by a creator who peaced out right after and left everyone to their own devices. So I'm going to apply predestination to the wheel as well. Predestination is actually a part of determinism because the past, or a past decided by God, determines the future, our lives. In Rand's case, his life is dictated by the wheel through past ages and dragons before him. There's even an entire set of prophecies dedicated to this, called the Carathan cycle, that are specific to the dragon. And prophecies, for the record, are guaranteed to happen in this universe, even if the exact time and how isn't known. It's no secret just how little control Rand does have, as Moraine, a powerful magic user called an Aes Sedai, tells Rand when the last battle is getting closer, you will face him, and that will be the time of determination. All spins on that moment, Dragon Reborn. All threads in the pattern are woven around your meeting, and the turning of the wheel pulls you toward it. So Rand's under a lot of pressure. So much depends on him making it to the last battle. The Dragon Reborn before him failed to defeat the Dark One and caused a breaking. On top of being a Chosen One, he has the responsibility to succeed in this last battle and fix everything. And everyone around him tells him pretty much constantly that he must not fail, which I want to point out they wouldn't feel the need to do if he really didn't have any other choice. Because even with all this pressure, the wheel doesn't completely take over Rand's life and give him everything he needs on a silver platter. Rand even thinks to himself at one point, in stories, things always happened as the hero planned, seemingly when he wanted them to happen. In real life, it rarely occurred that way, even for a Taviran, with prophecy supposedly working for him. In real life, it was scratch and hope, and luck if you found more than half a loaf when you needed a whole. He still has to figure out for himself how he needs to do these things and when. Some of these things do come to him, but he ultimately has to put forth his own effort for the rest. He could, even, technically speaking, not fulfill his destiny as the Dragon Reborn and walk away from it entirely. Doing this would be his decision, and it would also doom the entire world and cause an entire disaster. But my point is that he can. The wheel may push and pull a character to do what they need for the last battle to happen, but it never completely takes away their choice to not do what it wants. Determinism relies so much on the question of choice. How much we have or how much we don't. Is everything we do dictated by forces or laws of nature that we cannot control? Or do we get some choice in certain things but not others? Or do we actually have free will entirely? The Wheel of Time series deals with these questions by making the wheel a large part of these characters' lives. It drives the world and their future forward as it weaves the pattern. But it does leave some choices to these characters. They learn for themselves how they can reconcile their own freedom and with the wheel dictating some of their actions and their lives. Bear, a wise woman of the Aliel, advises another character that you must learn to ride fate. Only by surrendering to the pattern can you begin to have some control over the course of your own life. If you fight, the pattern will still force you, and you will find misery where you might have found contentment instead. Notice she doesn't say it's possible to ignore what the Wheel of Pattern has in store for this character, because it's generally not, or extremely hard, especially if doing so could prevent the last battle from happening at all. But she does advise that it's easier to recognize and come to terms with the fact that there are some aspects of life that they don't have any control over. So it's better to accept that and focus instead on what can be controlled, rather than fixating on what can't and being hung up by it.